In the fall of 1985, television viewers were startled by a ghost. Yul Brynner, gaunt but still his unmistakably commanding self, stared into a camera and delivered a warning from beyond the grave. "Now that I'm gone, I tell you, don't smoke. Whatever you do, just don't smoke." It was a devastatingly eerie and horribly ironic postscript to one of Hollywood's most larger-than-life careers. 4 months earlier, Brynner, the swaggering, proudly bald king of Siam, who had enthralled stage and screen audiences for decades, had succumbed to lung cancer at 65. Even in death, he refused to slip quietly away. That brief anti-smoking commercial released after his funeral was his final performance, and one that those who caught it would never forget. Yul Brynner's story was full of mystery, reinvention, scandal, and a relentless drive to hold on to the spotlight, even when the spotlight threatened to burn him alive. Welcome to Hollywood Mysteries. Yul Brynner loved a good myth, especially about himself. Nowhere was this more evident than in the tale of his own origins. In press interviews, he would spin a heck of a fantastical yarn, namely that he was born Tajay Khan, the son of a Mongolian prince and a Roma gypsy on the far-flung Russian island of Sakhalin. This, of course, was all smoke and mirrors. In reality, he entered the world as Yuli Borisovich Brynner on July 11, 1920, in the port city of Vladivostok on Russia's eastern edge. His lineage was exotic enough without all of that embellishment. His father's family was partly of Swiss-German and Buryat-Mongol heritage, and his maternal grandfather had been a Russian Jew who converted to the Orthodox Church. But for Yul, the mundane facts were never quite enough. And as with his personal heritage, the truth about the land he was born into was dramatic in its own right. Vladivostok at the time of his birth was a city in turmoil. A brief independent Far Eastern republic caught between the retreating White armies and advancing Bolsheviks. The Brynyas had been wealthy industrialists, but the Russian Civil War and Revolution stripped the family of most of their fortune. Still, Yul's early childhood was one of comfort. Nanny's, a stately 4-story family mansion. That is, until the day everything fell apart. In 1924, when Yul was just 4, his father Boris abandoned the family for a much younger lover, a Russian dancer. The heartbreak and scandal broke Yul's mother, Marusia. Left with 2 children, Yul and his older sister Vera, Marusia decided to flee Vladivostok in search of a fresh start. She first took them to Harbin, a city in Manchuria, northeast China, that had a large community of white Russian émigrés. There, amid Harbin's bustling expatriate enclave, young Yul was exposed to cultural curiosities that most children could only imagine. He later recalled being mesmerized by the performances of a famed Chinese opera star who performed in drag, a man in elaborate female costume singing and dancing on stage. The pageantry and illusion of those shows captivated the boy. In a sense, the idea that one could become someone else through sheer performance took root in Yul very early. By the early 1930s, new dangers loomed in Manchuria as Japanese expansion threatened the region. Once again, Marusia moved her family, this time all the way to Western Europe. In 1934, they arrived in Paris with teenage Yul in tow. He enrolled at the Lycée Moncel, ostensibly to get a French education, but academics held little charm for him. Far more influential were the city's music halls and cabarets. One night in Montmartre, Brynner heard a troupe of wandering Russian gypsy musicians play guitar and sing folk songs. It was a revelation. By 14, he had taught himself the guitar and was performing Russian Romani tunes in Parisian nightclubs, sometimes even accompanying his singer-sister Vera on stage. The slim, intense youth with the guitar became a minor sensation among the community of Russian exiles, who loved his authentic renditions of their nostalgic songs. Brynner's Paris years were nothing if not adventurous. He became a true child of Montmartre, absorbing the city's bohemian delights and dangers. At 16, he spent a summer as a lifeguard in Le Havre, where, on a whim, he joined a touring Cirque d'Hiver circus troupe. Under the big top, he reinvented himself yet again, this time as an acrobat. Night after night, he swung from a trapeze high above the crowd, thrilling at the applause below. But the circus life was as dangerous as it was exciting. Brynner suffered a serious back injury during a trapeze act, a fall that left him in nearly unbearable pain. To cope, the teenager made a fateful turn. He began taking opium for relief. What started as pain management slid rapidly into addiction. By age 17, Yul Brynner, the future picture of robust vitality, was a secret drug addict, slipping into the shadows of Paris to buy opium from street dealers. One of those twilight transactions led to an unlikely encounter. While buying his narcotic escape, Brynner met Jean Cocteau, the famed French poet, playwright, and opium addict himself. The eccentric Cocteau took a shine to the exotic young Russian. Through Cocteau, Brynner suddenly found himself introduced to the creme of Parisian art society: Pablo Picasso, Salvador Dali, and even the great cabaret star Josephine Baker. It was a heady circle for a teenager. Cocteau and his avant-garde friends showed Yul a world of art, indulgence, and surreal possibility, undoubtedly shaping the confident, worldly persona he later cultivated. But the bohemian dream could not last. Brynner's family, understandably alarmed by his drug habit, intervened to save him from himself. With financial help from a well-off aunt, they checked Yul into a clinic in Lausanne, Switzerland. There, in 1937, he underwent a year of treatment for opiate addiction, including then experimental hypnotherapy. Remarkably, it worked. Brynner emerged clean from drugs, vowing never to touch them again. However, in beating one addiction, he promptly acquired another: cigarettes. He had likely smoked on and off since his early teens, but in the sanatorium, cigarettes became a crutch, one that he would lean on heavily for the rest of his life. In another twist of fate, Brynner's estranged father Boris re-entered the picture around this time and unwittingly put his son on the path to stardom. Boris Brynner, who had rebuilt his life in Manchuria with a new wife, actress Katerina Kornakova, invited Yul to stay with them after his convalescence. Perhaps seeing a chance to mend their fractured relationship, Boris indulged in his son's interest in the arts. Katerina, Yul's stepmother, had been a performer with the Moscow Art Theater, and she happily became the young man's first acting coach. She would perform scenes from Chekhov or Stanislavski's repertoire and have Yul mimic her, teaching him to use his voice and body to convey emotion. The effect on Yul was electrifying. He had discovered his true calling. Impressed with his natural talent and intensity, Katerina wrote a glowing letter of recommendation to her friend Michael Chekhov, nephew of the playwright Anton Chekhov, who was running an acting school in the United States. Boris, perhaps feeling guilty for years of neglect, agreed to finance Yul's journey to America to study under Chekhov. At the same time, Marusia was diagnosed with an illness that required treatment in a New York hospital. The solution was clear. Mother and son would go to America together. Before I get into Yul's new life in America, I've got a few other stories to tell you about. Have you ever wondered why America's most beloved Oscar-winning screen mom, Anne Revere, was banned from Hollywood? Or what about the incredible magic that went into making King Kong? Or indeed the bizarre story of the tragic genius Hollywood screenwriter who was, apparently, reincarnated as a toddler? You can find out about all of these and more as a YouTube member or Patreon supporter. Sign up to the Hollywood Histories tier for $3 a month, and you'll get an extra weekly episode for supporting the channel. The great thing about Patreon is that I don't have to censor so much either, so you can have the unfiltered truth over there. Sign up for the 7-day free trial and find out more. I'll put a link on screen now. Thank you so much to all of our supporters. The Patreon page is really becoming a great movie community. But for now, let's get back to the show. Mother and son embarked on a steamer from Kobe, Japan in autumn 1940 and arrived in San Francisco in October of that year. From there, Yul and Marusia crisscrossed the United States by train, finally reuniting with Yul's sister Vera in New York City. Vera, now a classically trained soprano, was pursuing her own stage career. She would later sing on Broadway and television. Yul, just 20 and speaking only halting English, dove headlong into his new American life. He enrolled in Michael Chekhov's drama classes in Connecticut. By day, he studied Stanislavskian technique with the master. By night, to pay the bills, he worked odd jobs. Reportedly everything from a longshoreman to a truck driver and stagehand for Chekhov's theater troupe. He was determined by sheer will to conquer the English language and the American stage. The break came faster than expected. In December 1941, just weeks after his 21st birthday, Yul Brynner made his Broadway debut in a production of Twelfth Night. He was cast as Fabian, a minor comic role with only a few lines, a part chosen in part because his English was still shaky and tinged with the strong Russian accent. Brynner threw himself into the role regardless. It was a short-lived run. The attack on Pearl Harbor that month led many Broadway shows to close abruptly, but the experience was invaluable. On stage in New York under bright lights, he learned how to project confidence even when he didn't fully understand the language. He also learned that in America, talent could trump origin. The exotic Russian émigré with the guitar had found a new home on the boards of Broadway. With the United States entering World War II, Brynner found another way to contribute his talents. He was fluent in French and Russian, and in 1942 he was hired as a radio announcer by the U.S. Office of War Information. From a studio in San Francisco and later in New York, Brynner's rich voice carried across the airways to Nazi-occupied France, delivering news and propaganda in French, and to the Soviet Union via the Voice of America broadcasts in Russian. It's easy to imagine the young actor hunched over a microphone, smoking incessantly, his baritone declaring Allied slogans into the night in Russian and French. These wartime broadcasts made Brynner a familiar voice, if not yet a face, to thousands of listeners abroad. They also gave him poise and confidence. After all, addressing unseen masses in a time of crisis is a trial by fire for one's stage nerves. Brynner passed that test with ease. During the war years, Brynner's acting gigs were sporadic. He took whatever came his way. In 1944, he appeared in a modest touring production of a new musical called Lute Song, starring a young Mary Martin. That same year, in a rare burst of domesticity, Yul married Virginia Gilmore, a film and stage actress known in Hollywood for a few 1940s pictures. He was 24, she 25, two struggling actors trying to build a stable home in turbulent times. They soon had a child, a son, born in 1946, whom Yul nicknamed Rock. But if Brynner tried on the role of conventional husband and father, it didn't entirely fit. He was charismatic, restless, and magnetic to others. Fidelity was not his strong suit. Even as he changed diapers at home, he was socializing in the lively post-war Broadway scene, making connections that would propel his career. One unusual gig Brynner landed during this period was as a model, and it led to a secret that he guarded closely for decades. Desperate for cash in the early 1940s, Yul agreed to pose for famed photographer George Platt Lynes, who was known for his elegant, often homoerotic nude portraits. In 1942, Yul posed completely naked for Lynes' camera. In the photos, he is lean, muscular, with a thick mane of dark hair, a far cry from the bald image that would later define him. These artistic nude shots remained out of public view, circulated only among private collectors, but they did exist. In an era when prudish Hollywood studios enforced morality clauses, the mere existence of such photographs could have been career-ending. Yul knew this and kept the modeling episode very quiet. It only came to light long after he became famous. However, even then, they only served to fuel the whispers that had trailed him since his youth. Those whispers concerned Brynner's sexuality. To the world, Yul Brynner was a virile ladies' man, and indeed he loved women passionately, and they loved him back. But there were other dimensions to his private life. While studying acting in 1941, Brynner had grown extremely close to a fellow student, a handsome American actor named Herb Hatfield, later famous as the star of The Picture of Dorian Gray. Their friendship at Michael Chekhov's studio in Connecticut went beyond the ordinary. Many of their classmates later quietly confirmed that Brynner and Hatfield were, for a time, romantically involved. In the early 1940s, this was a dangerous liaison. Being gay or bisexual was deeply stigmatized and could even invite legal trouble. Yul never publicly acknowledged this chapter of his life, but it left an imprint. The Hatfield affair was the first such whisper. It would not be the last. Brynner became adept at balancing his unconventional private appetites with a carefully crafted public image. It was a high-wire act he maintained throughout his life, the exotic family man with a dark, untold secret in the wings that society just wasn't ready for yet. If Yul had trouble finding steady acting work in the mid-1940s, that problem was about to vanish. His big break arrived courtesy of the very same Mary Martin who had given him a part in Lute Song. In 1950, Martin heard that composers Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein were auditioning for a new Broadway musical called The King and I, based on the story of the King of Siam and an English governess. Martin recommended her friend Yul for the lead role of King Mongkut. At first, Brynner was hesitant. By this point, he had actually stepped away from performing and found success as a television director at CBS, one of the youngest directors in the early days of live TV drama. He directed episodes of the anthology Studio One and even acted on a few TV shows alongside his wife, Virginia. Returning to the stage felt like a step backward, and the role of an Asian king in a musical sounded unpromising on paper. But Martin persisted and Yul reluctantly agreed to a meeting. He later admitted that as soon as he read the script, he was hooked. The character of King Mongkut, proud, curious, tyrannical, yet vulnerable, fascinated him. This was no token exotic part. It was a starring role with depth. Yul threw himself into auditions and won the role that would define his life. When rehearsals for The King and I began in early 1951, Brynner faced one immediate defining decision: what to do about his hair. At the time, he still sported a full head of thick black hair. The show's costume designer Irene Sheriff felt that the King of Siam should appear on stage with a shaved head to emphasize Mongkut's authoritarian, almost monk-like control. Yul balked. Shaving his head seemed extreme and potentially unattractive. He was convinced he'd, quote, look terrible bald. Only during the show's out-of-town tryouts did he finally give in and razor off his hair, and he applied dark makeup to his newly bare scalp to achieve a uniform look. The effect was electrifying. On stage, the now completely bald Yul Brynner cut a striking, almost alien figure. Audiences could not take their eyes off of him. This was a time when men who were losing their hair would never have conceived of shaving it off, let alone a man whose hair was still thick. His angular, shaved head look was so powerful that it became his trademark for the rest of his life. Brynner's bold style made shaved heads chic, even sexy. Barbers reported that some men were asking for the Yul Brynner look, willingly shedding their hair to emulate the charismatic new star. Brynner, once so self-conscious about it, realized the bald head gave him an extra aura of authority and exoticism. He embraced it fully. When The King and I premiered on Broadway in March 1951, Yul Brynner was virtually an unknown. The star of the show was Gertrude Lawrence, the glamorous British actress playing the governess Anna. Indeed, in the playbills, Lawrence's name was atop the cast. Brynner's was in smaller font below. But almost from opening night, it became clear that a new star had arrived. Brynner's performance as King Mongkut was a dynamo of energy, imperious, thunderous, yet humorous and oddly poignant. Critics raved about the exotic leading man with the mesmerizing stage presence. The show was a smash hit. Brynner won the 1952 Tony Award for Best Featured Actor in a Musical. Lawrence won Best Actress. Night after night, audiences were enchanted by the bald actor with the rich baritone voice famously commanding, etc., 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 from his throne. Offstage, the chemistry between the 35-year-old Brynner and the 52-year-old Lawrence was also fueling gossip. In truth, the two were in fact having an affair during the run of the show. Lawrence, who was ill, although she did not yet know she had liver cancer, found comfort and vitality in Brynner's youthful passion. For Brynner, the affair was exhilarating, a secret royal romance with the reigning Queen of Broadway. It had an almost storybook irony, given their roles. However, a shocking tragedy struck in September 1952, when Gertrude Lawrence collapsed and died unexpectedly during the show's run. Yul was devastated. They had performed together over 500 times and had created a close bond through the rhythms of Rodgers and Hammerstein's songs and the intimacy of the stage and their love affair. Rodgers and Hammerstein, though, later made a crack about Brynner's complex reaction. As they told the story, when Brynner heard that Lawrence had passed away, he broke down sobbing, not only from grief but also, quote, at the news of his getting top billing at last. It was a dark joke that contained a kernel of truth. With Lawrence gone, Brynner was now the undisputed star of The King and I. The show continued and he now took top line on the marquee. Brynner's ego, always substantial, certainly did not mind that elevation. He would later acknowledge Lawrence's importance to the show's success, but Yul also understood that he was now the selling point. In the wake of this bittersweet turn, Yul pushed himself even harder on stage, delivering some of the best performances of his career as a sort of tribute to his fallen co-star. By the time The King and I finally closed on Broadway in 1954, Brynner had cemented himself as a major theatrical star. He had played the King 1,246 times in that initial run, a marathon of consistency and charisma. What could possibly follow such a triumph? Hollywood, of course. Yul was invited to reprise his role in a lavish 20th Century Fox film adaptation of The King and I. He might have been a novice to cinema, having only one minor film credit, a B-movie crime drama from 1949, but on set he carried himself with the confidence of a seasoned movie star. The 1956 film, directed by Walter Lang, was a Technicolor spectacle, with Brynner's magnetic performance opposite Deborah Kerr, who played Anna in the film. The King and I became a huge critical and commercial success. Brynner was rewarded with the 1956 Academy Award for Best Actor for immortalizing on screen the role he had created on stage. In his Oscar statuette, the former penniless circus kid from Vladivostok found tangible validation that he had become Hollywood royalty. The year 1956 was the apex of Brynner's film career in more ways than one. Besides The King and I, he also appeared in no fewer than 3 other major films in that single year. This showcased a range that surprised those who only knew him as a Siamese monarch. Legendary director Cecil B. DeMille, impressed by Brynner's stage gravitas, cast him as Pharaoh Ramses II in 1956's The Ten Commandments, an epic that would become one of the decade's biggest hits. With hawk-like eyeliner, a gleaming bald pate, and a cape of gold lame, Brynner's Ramses was imperious and smoldering, holding his own opposite Charlton Heston's Moses. The image of Yul as the haughty Egyptian king defiantly shouting, "So let it be written, so let it be done," became iconic in its own right. That same year, he traded ancient robes for modern suits in Anastasia, playing a suave Russian émigré conman opposite Ingrid Bergman, who won an Oscar for that film. In Anastasia, Brynner's character tenderly coaches a troubled young woman to impersonate a lost princess. It was a nuanced performance that proved his intensity could be channeled gently, even romantically. By the end of 1956, Yul Brynner had 3 huge films in theaters concurrently. The 4th, Port of New York, had been a minor release earlier. He had become one of Hollywood's most in-demand leading men virtually overnight. Naturally, more starring roles followed. Yul was nothing if not prolific in the late 1950s. He played one of the brothers Karamazov in a star-studded adaptation of Dostoevsky. He portrayed Jean Lafitte, the swashbuckling pirate in The Buccaneer, and a relentless Soviet officer in The Journey. In Solomon and Sheba, he stepped into the role of King Solomon at the last minute after the original star, Tyrone Power, died during filming. Yul wore a wig of black hair for that role, one of the rare times post-1951 that he would be seen on screen with hair, as the part demanded it. He even ventured into light comedy with Once More with Feeling, playing a temperamental orchestra conductor opposite Kay Kendall. That attempt of comedy flopped. Audiences preferred Brynner in epic or exotic mode, not sly farce. But it hardly dented his momentum. By 1960, Brynner was ready for another change of scene. Literally. He traded royal robes and historical epics for a cowboy hat and six-shooter headlining the Western The Magnificent Seven. The film, a remake of Kurosawa's Seven Samurai, featured Yul as Chris Adams, the taciturn leader of 7 gunmen hired to defend a Mexican village. Surrounded by a stellar ensemble, Steve McQueen, Charles Bronson, James Coburn, among others, Brynner projected a cool, coiled authority as the black-clad gunslinger. On screen, the camaraderie and tension among the 7 outlaws felt authentic. Off-screen, however, a bitter feud was brewing between Yul and up-and-coming star Steve McQueen. The set of The Magnificent Seven became a battleground of egos. McQueen, chafing at having relatively few lines, began surreptitiously upstaging Brynner during filming. In scenes where Brynner was speaking, McQueen would do ostentatious little actions, tipping his hat, fiddling with his shotgun shells, to draw the eye of the audience. Initially, Brynner seethed quietly as the younger actor stole focus. But as the shoot went on, McQueen's childish tricks, as one crew member called them, escalated. Perhaps the most infuriating was McQueen's habit of kicking at the dirt mounds Brynner stood on. Brynner at 5'10" sometimes stood on small piles of earth to appear taller next to the 5'9" McQueen. Whenever Brynner wasn't looking, McQueen would subtly scuff away the mound, leveling the height difference. This petty one-upmanship finally led to a confrontation. On a day of shooting a group scene, Brynner snapped. In front of the casting crew, he grabbed McQueen by the shoulder and roughly pulled him aside. "Cut the bullshit," Brynner warned, furious that McQueen was undermining the film for his own ego. Years later, McQueen coolly recalled that moment. "We didn't get along. Brynner came up to me in front of a lot of people and grabbed me. He was mad about something." McQueen chalked it up to Brynner feeling threatened. "He doesn't ride well and knows nothing about guns, so maybe he thought I represented a threat. I was in my element. He wasn't." To be sure, McQueen's natural cowboy charisma did shine, but Brynner was no pushover. Their dispute simmered through production. Co-star Robert Vaughn observed that McQueen's competitiveness was pathological. Steve was intensely competitive. It wasn't enough to just be successful. He had to be more successful than anyone else. In the end, what seemed like petty tension lent a crackling energy to the film. The Magnificent Seven was at first only a modest success in the US, but it became hugely popular overseas and later, on television, attained classic status. Brynner and McQueen never reconciled their differences. McQueen reportedly tried to make amends when he was dying of cancer in 1980, but Brynner rebuffed him. Yet their rivalry has gone down in Hollywood lore as a prime example of dueling egos, the aging king and the brash young prince vying for the throne. By the early 1960s, Yul Brynner was at the peak of his fame, and perhaps beginning to feel the wear of it. He had been churning out films non-stop, playing a Turkish gypsy in Kings of the Sun, a mercenary in Morituri, alongside Marlon Brando, and so on. The Hollywood studio system itself was changing, with new stars and new styles coming into vogue. Ever the cosmopolitan, Brynner started spending more time in Europe. In 1960, shortly after filming The Magnificent Seven, he moved his family to Switzerland and took up Swiss citizenship. Partly this was a tax decision, but also a lifestyle choice. He enjoyed the privacy that European residence afforded him. He continued making films on both sides of the Atlantic, though the projects were more uneven now. A caper comedy here, a war thriller there. Some clicked with audiences, some didn't. Brynner's brand remained exotic action or historical pieces. One of his more notable late 60s roles was in The Mad Woman of Chaillot with Katharine Hepburn, a satire in which he played a deposed tyrant. Yet even as his film career hit a few box office bumps, Brynner found ways to keep his star polished. One way was returning to his first love, music. In 1967, Yul recorded an album called The Gypsy and I, featuring him singing the Russian and Roma folk songs of his youth. Listeners who only knew him as a stern actor might have been surprised to hear Brynner strumming a guitar and crooning in Russian. but those who knew him well understood this was a return to his roots. He even performed these songs on television variety shows, showcasing a cheerful, charming side of himself that his film characters rarely displayed. For a moment, Yul Brynner was a folk singer, yet another role in his eclectic life. But nothing could keep Yul away from the spotlight of The King and I for too long. The role was simply too lucrative and too beloved. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, whenever film offers grew thin or a marriage fell apart, more on that soon, Brynner would don the silk costumes of King Mongkut once again and tour with the musical. As one observer noted, he wisely realized that age only made his portrayal more authoritative, and age-related changes in his appearance didn't affect the role. Indeed, by middle age, Yul actually more closely resembled the mature Siamese king he was portraying than he had in 1951. He once half-joked that he could probably play the king until the day he died, and many suspected he intended to do just that. Yet behind the scenes, Brynner's personal life was increasingly tumultuous. It had turned into a whole tapestry of marriages, divorces, and very public love affairs. His marriage to Virginia Gilmore had unraveled by 1960, done in by Brynner's long absences and infidelities. Almost immediately after that divorce, the 40-year-old Yul married Doris Kleiner, a Chilean-born model, in 1960. They seemed happy for a time. Doris gave birth to a daughter, Victoria, in 1962. But Brynner's wandering eye did not relent. This was the period when he was linked romantically to a string of high-profile stars. He had a well-known fling with the legendary Marlene Dietrich, nearly 20 years his senior, yet still immensely alluring. Dietrich, ever the sophisticate, supposedly enjoyed parading her trophy boy Brynner at European nightclubs until the affair burned out. He was also rumored to have dalliances with Judy Garland and Joan Crawford, both of whom found solace with Brynner during difficult times in their lives. Perhaps most intriguing was his connection with Ingrid Bergman. Brynner and Bergman worked together intimately on Anastasia and reportedly became very close. Bergman was married at the time, Brynner was not, but rumors soon emerged about their on-set chemistry moving off-set. Whether fact or fiction, Brynner's reputation as a Don Juan was well established. Small wonder his second marriage to Doris Kleiner crumbled by 1967. After a few bachelor years, Brynner tried marriage once more, this time with the French socialite Jacqueline Thion de Lachon, whom he wed in 1971. Jacqueline provided a measure of European high society stability. They made a striking couple, often photographed on the Riviera or at Swiss ski resorts. In the mid-1970s, with the Vietnam War producing tragic humanitarian crises, Brynner and Jacqueline adopted 2 infants from Vietnam, daughters Mia and Melody. Brynner was in his mid-50s, starting fatherhood anew. Friends say the adoption softened him. He was an unexpectedly doting father to the girls, perhaps making up for lost time with his older children, whom he had rarely seen as they grew up. The couple settled into a quieter life in France for a while. Brynner even converted to Orthodox Christianity, Jacqueline's faith, reportedly with great ceremony. However, by 1981, this third marriage too was faltering. Brynner's restless nature didn't spare him in his 50s. He still craved excitement, flirtation, and the adoration of an audience. Jacqueline, weary of his ego and the constant travel, separated from him. Their divorce became final in 1981, ending a decade-long union. Brynner's romantic escapades were the stuff of gossip columns, but they also underscored something fundamental about him. He needed to be adored, whether by one person or an auditorium of thousands. Actor Frank Langella, who knew him later in life, remarked that no actor he'd met talked about himself as incessantly as Yul did. Brynner was also, Langella said, never far from a full-length mirror, a cutting metaphor for the older actor's vanity. Certainly, some of Brynner's on-set behavior had become legendary for its self-indulgence. During the shooting of Moratori in the mid-60s, for example, Yul insisted that a helicopter landing pad be built on the deck of the ship they were using as a set, simply so that he could be airlifted to a plush hotel on shore each night, rather than stay on the cramped ship with everyone else. The studio acquiesced to this diva demand, at significant expense. Yul also expected star treatment in the theater. When he headlined The King and I on Broadway again in the late 1970s, he had a special elevator installed at the theater large enough to fit his chauffeured car, meaning he could be driven directly inside to his dressing room, thus bypassing any annoying fans at the stage door. He was not one to tolerate the plebeian aspects of fame. These anecdotes circulated widely, painting Yul as Hollywood's king of mean, as one headline later put it. Petty, demanding, merciless. The most mesmerizing actor of his age was also, apparently, one of the rudest. Yul himself half acknowledged this. "I lived life on my own terms," he once said unapologetically in an interview. Those terms included commanding absolute respect on set and off. He had indulged every whim a star of his magnitude could, and seldom said sorry. By 1973, many in Hollywood saw Brynner as a bit of a relic from the 1950s, a throwback to cinematic spectacles of a bygone era. But he had one more iconic role up his sleeve, and fittingly, it traded on both his old image and the new zeitgeist. That year, Brynner starred in Westworld, a science fiction film written and directed by Michael Crichton. The premise, a futuristic amusement park populated by lifelike robots who cater to guests' wildest fantasies, until the robots malfunction and start killing the guests. Brynner played the main antagonist, the gunslinger, a black-clad robotic cowboy who runs amok. It was a clear riff on his Magnificent Seven persona. In fact, the costume Yul wears in Westworld was deliberately modeled on his Chris Adams outfit, down to the flat-brimmed hat. With minimal dialogue and an emotionless stare, Yul managed to create one of the most chilling villains of the 1970s. Critic Frank Rich later noted that what could have been a campy or ludicrous role, an animatronic cowboy, became a chilling characterization in Brynner's hands, thanks to his steady, steely-eyed automaton glare as he stalked his prey. Westworld was a hit and spawned the concept of the modern sci-fi thriller. Once again, Brynner had reinvented himself, this time as a precursor to the Terminator, a comparison often made as Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator clearly owes a debt to Brynner's Gunslinger. It was Brynner's last major film role. After Westworld and a brief appearance in its sequel, Future World in 1976, he largely stepped away from Hollywood. The truth was his interest in making movies was waning. He had nothing left to prove on the silver screen, and his health was quietly starting to decline, though he didn't know it yet. In 1983, at the age of 62, Yul Brynner surprised even those close to him by marrying for the fourth time. His bride was Kathy Lee, a 24-year-old ballerina from Malaysia whom he had met when she danced in the King and I revival. Despite the 38-year age gap, Brynner seemed genuinely smitten and perhaps eager for one last shot at marital bliss. He acted like a young groom, a friend observed, noting the irony of the famously womanizing Brynner suddenly playing the doting husband in his sunset years. Kathy Lee gave Brynner a kind of gentle care he'd rarely accepted before, and he in turn gave her the role of companion in which he knew would likely be the final chapter of his life. Around this time, Brynner began experiencing bouts of ill health, a persistent cough, fatigue, and weight loss. A lifetime of relentless cigarette smoking, reportedly up to 5 packs a day at his worst, was finally exacting its price. In September 1983, Brynner was diagnosed with lung cancer. Doctors found a tumor in his left lung. For a man who had always seemed larger than life, indestructible in his own mind, it was a crushing moment. Yul initially kept the news private, sharing it only with Kathy and a few intimates. Characteristically, he decided he would go out his way, on stage, under the lights, where he always felt most alive. In 1984, defying medical advice, Brynner embarked on a dramatic farewell tour in his royal role. He signed on for yet another revival of The King and I, slated to tour the United States and then land on Broadway for a final engagement. By now, he had portrayed King Mongkut over 30 years and in thousands of performances, but this time was different. Yul knew these shows would be his last. Audiences packed theaters, not knowing the full truth of his condition, only sensing that they were witnessing the swan song of a legend. Brynner, ever the showman, gave every ounce of himself on stage. Observers noted that he had lost weight and his voice had grown more raspy, but the regal posture and flashing dark eyes were undimmed. Backstage, however, the toll was evident. Brynner's lungs were so damaged by disease that he needed an oxygen tank between scenes just to catch his breath. Stagehands sometimes saw him backstage breathing through a mask, then tossing it aside and striding out for the next number as if nothing were amiss. This gritty determination moved everyone around him. During this tour, Yul also filmed an interview with Good Morning America where, for the first time, he spoke frankly about his condition and the cause. "If I could take back that smoking, we wouldn't be talking about any cancer," he lamented, looking straight into the camera. "I'm convinced of that." It was a stark admission from a man who had always projected strength and invulnerability. On June 30th, 1985, Yul Brynner performed The King and I for the 4,625th time, his final bow as the king. At the Broadway Theater in New York, the curtain came down and the audience erupted in an ovation that seemed to last forever. Brynner, clad in the Siamese monarch's royal attire, stood at center stage, soaking in the love one last time. Those close to him say he had tears in his eyes. He likely knew he would never stand there again. Less than 3 months later, on October 10th, 1985, Yul Brynner died in a New York hospital with Kathy by his side. Coincidentally, that very morning, another cinematic giant, Orson Welles, had also passed away, marking October 10th as a day of bittersweet significance in Hollywood lore. Brynner's death made headlines worldwide. To millions, it truly felt like a king had died. Yet Brynner had one more message to deliver, and it came shortly after his passing. As per his wishes, the American Cancer Society began airing a 30-second spot derived from Brynner's final TV interview. In it, a somber Brynner, eyes directly on the viewer, speaks with the gravity of a man addressing posterity. "Now that I'm gone, I tell you, don't smoke. Whatever you do, just don't smoke." The PSA sent chills through audiences. Here was the once indestructible King of Siam, imploring others not to make the same fatal mistake he had. "This is the most powerful indictment of smoking that we've ever produced," said an American Cancer Society official, noting that the spot's impact was magnified by Brynner's international fame. The ad ran countless times on American and even international television, a haunting echo of Brynner's voice that, for a moment, cut through the usual programming like a warning from a wise ghost. Yul Brynner lived a life that was operatic in scope, a poor boy from a vanished empire who became a king in make-believe, a man who lied about his past yet delivered truth in his performances, someone loved and loathed, indulged and ultimately humbled. In his last act, he transformed himself into a cautionary figure, using his own death to teach others the value of life. But above all, he left the imprint of a singular presence, a true sophisticate of deliberately mysterious origins, and indeed Yul wore that enigma like a well-tailored suit. In an age of manufactured stars, Yul was the real deal, self-invented, larger than life, and unforgettably unique. In the end, even as the man fades into history, the myth of Yul Brynner, the king, the gunslinger, the man who would be king, endures, etc., etc., etc. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. I think you'll all agree that Yul's life was one that makes us all want to be a little more adventurous. In some ways, it was more Hollywood than Hollywood. Anyway, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and why not take a look at the Hollywood Mystery Store, where we have some amazing exclusive merch available. There's a link on screen and down in the description. Be sure to leave me a comment about which of Yul's roles is your favorite. Until next time, sweet dreams.